Hey everybody, Asher here, and today we're going to do another Stellaris preview. Today we're talking about military conquest and all that good stuff, because it's not a Paradox game without not just building up your nation and creating some great austere society, but also taking your boots and stomping out other people, or in this case, spaceships. So we're going to talk about a few things, including alliance building and somewhat of how technology ties into all of this, but the number one thing that we're going to discuss is ships and the combat itself, because what it really comes down to is Stellaris is not unlike a lot of other space 4X games or space strategy games in general, in that you have to deal with and work with a ship designer. You do get to customize your own outfits and everything, but there are some considerations to keep in mind. This is a Paradox game, so the combat is not going to be directly controlled. You don't take flight of your own ship, you don't take flight of your own squadron and everything and lead them around and do the most optimal moves using your APM and micromanagement skills to your advantage. No, the AI controls that. You can tell your fleets where to go, where to engage, in general sense, like other Paradox games, but that's about the extent of it. So what it's going to come down to more is proper equipment, proper loadout, if I can get the words out. And where that starts is with the ship designer, which we're looking a little bit at details from Dev Diary 17, 18, and to a lesser extent 19 in this, so we'll start with 17 and some images that are from it. The ship designer, there's multiple hulls that you'll be able to get, and you can select what your hulls look like when you develop your race and everything. But each of these hulls have different hard points, and the bigger your ship, the more hard points you have for things like weapons, things like armor, things like shields, things like engines. Now, some considerations for the ship designer. First off, if this is not your thing, if this is not your bag at all, what you can do is just use the auto-generate button based on what you've researched so far, because there is specific military research that you will be able to do from the get-go. So if you just want to auto-generate your ships, that's great, you can do that. But if you do want to load out your ships, you can try and do some things that balance between cost of production, build time, things like that, speed, lots of things that you can consider, and lots of technology that you can go into. But one of the points that stands out to me a little bit is that it's not just that you have multiple systems of travel, and that influences how you go around space. We'll talk about that in a little bit. What it also does is it influences how you can design your ships. Now, what one of the dev diaries, specifically 17, alluded to is that you will be able to get multiple forms of FTL travel. Now, that's not just the jump drive, which has been talked about as possibly creating one of the in-game disasters of tearing a hole in the universe, but we also have the possibility of just being able to research hyperlane travel, any of those things. If you don't have wormholes, being able to create it. So you may be able to have a variety of ships. Paradox has said point blank that you can't have ships with different types of FTL systems in the same fleet. I can see why from a just not destroying your brain scenario, but different things such as the actual warp drive itself, one of its disadvantages is that it takes a lot of energy from your ship. So I'm curious exactly how that plays out in terms of cost and everything else, if it has something to do with maintenance, things like that. But you have to consider not just what your ship has, but also where it can go, how it can go. So to that end, there are multiple different avenues, or I'm getting my words off here, but there are multiple different avenues you can use for actually equipping your ship. You can have, and it's kind of standard for a lot of sci-fi games, you can have huge gunboats, you can have huge laser boats, you can just fire a bunch of missiles all the time. Now I'm just thinking like EVE Online all over again. Do I want more shields? Do I want more armor? Do I want point defense systems? All that stuff's pretty much in there. And there are also some special projects that you can research. This has been seen on the Blorg stream as well as otherwise, where if you investigate wrecks of enemies, if you investigate wrecks of different entities that you encounter in the galaxy, you can actually get some weapons or derivative technology from them as well, which is pretty neat. But some of the things to keep in mind is that there is a little bit of a, I don't know if it's like necessarily a crisscross or checks and balance, but like if you go into engagement and you have a bunch of shields and everything, and if they have a bunch of bullets or like autocannons or something, they can tear down your shields and you may be in trouble. Or if you decide, okay, I want to hit them at the range, I want to shoot a bunch of missiles, and they have a bunch of point defense systems, which do actually go in the weapon slot according to the dev diaries and according to what I've seen in game. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments by all means for any of this. Pretty much those go into, you don't have a great way to scout your enemy except to go in and engage. So if you get torn up, I guess that's the cost of warfare, which is an interesting commentary on maybe the future of, we are so far away from each other we can't necessarily scout, but I think it is something where eventually Paradox, probably in some kind of expansion, will put a more robust espionage system, because at least as it stands right now at release, that's probably the biggest gaping hole. There's no great way to get intel on your rivals except for just knocking on their door and saying, we want your stuff, which, like other Paradox games, you do have this similar you go to war, you're supposed to have some kind of just cause for taking planets, although that hasn't exactly manifested itself in the streams or other gameplay that I see. I'm not sure if maybe I've missed something big, but at least in other games like Crusader Kings 2 or EU4, you have to have Casus Belli, which I probably just mispronounced, but you have to have some justification, even if you forge the documents just to pretend, but you have to have some justification going for war. Maybe it's because somebody doesn't like you, I don't know. But to take a planet, you do have to go through, go battle, get enough war score to actually get your goals, and then occupy those goals to take them in. So, which is all pretty cool. However, once again, you cannot actually just control your ships. You have to essentially take your fleet and hope that you've designed your ship well enough that it will be able to overcome the AIs. And maybe that's where you want to have a more diverse fleet. Maybe it's where you want to have maybe a bunch of little ships instead of huge battleships, or maybe you want to have huge gunboats that just can kill things before they approach you. There's a lot of different avenues, and as we have seen in gameplay footage so far, there are a variety of strategies that you can take in, so that's pretty cool. And like I said, there's different weapons that you can research, and I think what it boils down to too, though, is that the way that war, you kind of wage it in this game, is going to change compared to other games from Paradox, and that's with the alliance system. You can, and I did allude to this in a text in my last preview, but I'll expound on it a bit more here. You can form like alliances, non-aggression pacts, a lot of the standard suite of diplomatic actions that you're used to from strategy games. But the way Stellaris handles alliances is a little bit differently. You can, if you get enough people in your alliance, you can form a federation, and what that means is that alliances typically have to act in a unified stance. But as a federation, you're bigger, you can control over more space. But more importantly, is that you actually get direct control of your military fleet and of your allies' military fleet. So it is the United Federation force of who knows what. I've gotten a few comments about the Imperium of Man is just going to go and take over anybody else, or a lot of those 40k references, things like that. Now that's cool by itself. But one thing that is going to turn some people on ahead, I'm waiting to see forum posts about it, I've already seen a few already just leading up to the game, is that you only get to have control of the entire Federation force for a certain period of time. Now granted, if you're in war, that's not necessarily going to be too much of a problem, because the AI is going to think, okay, I need to go to war. But my point is that you get equal split time between who gets to control all the big guns, all the big toys, who gets to make all the big decisions. So sometimes you're going to be playing a backseat to the AI if you're playing single player. Now if you're playing multiplayer, and the game does support up to 32-player multiplayer, and there will be a stream later this week from Paradox showcasing some multiplayer, so I'm looking forward to seeing that and hopefully gleaning some more information as well. That could be where the Federation becomes a bit bigger, because it does allow you to become much stronger, much bigger than you otherwise are. Although once again, the limitation that could come up, but you can coordinate in multiplayer games a little more, but since you cannot necessarily pack fleets together that have different warp drives or warp systems, you're a little limited necessarily how you can control people, or you have to split off your fleets. Now where that stands from what I've seen, at least in the game a little bit, is that so far how things have manifested themselves, most of the opponents that I've seen people play against do not use the hyperdrive system. I've seen some warp enemies, I've seen some wormhole enemies, and I did underestimate from my first read versus what I've seen in game of wormholes. They will let you actually jump pretty far, and apparently stations just stay even if you lose the space as well. I'm not sure if that's going to necessarily change or anything like that, but the AI seems to be prone to spamming wormhole stations, so that could get really, really annoying, and I'm curious if, as a human player, if you'll be able to handle upkeep, if there is a significant upkeep with wormhole stations. And I apologize for the interruption there. I think the point I was making before is that, at least from what I've seen so far, I've seen some gameplay in terms of wormholes and wormhole spam by the AI. I have seen, and it does make sense, how the warp drive works. I'm a little curious to see hyperlanes, and or if that's going to be something that's going to be able to be taken advantage of, especially in a multiplayer setting, especially if you are in a federation where your opponents are in a federation where maybe you could lock out part of their supporting fleet just by blocking off some of those hyperlanes. I'm not exactly sure if that was the point I was going for, but that's kind of where I come back to. Also, one point to keep in mind is that when you do have your federation and everything, it's not like you totally lose control of your own fleets and everything. You still have them and you can still use them and everything, but when the federation calls and everybody goes to war and things like that, it won't necessarily be your turn to be in control. But let's say you are able to go ahead and get your federation's forces, and then you do conquer somebody else. What then? Like I said before, you do have kind of your standard assortment of peace options that are available, and you will, like other games, be forced into a peace treaty that will keep you from acting over and over again. So you can't just swell on somebody immediately, break a peace treaty, and go on. But there are some options for conquering other people. You can make them distribute, you can make them as a protectorate, you can as a vassal, or you can kind of give them their own sort of independence under themselves, some autonomy. Sometimes that'll make them a little happier, but there's some people that I know want to role play out there as well, just want to crush and possibly take over, just reassimilate the world, make it in their own image. And you do have the option to totally purge the population. Obviously not great for diplomacy, but a lot of times races or fictional people or whatever that want to purge everyone else don't exactly care about diplomacy. But those, like I said, the options are wide open. If you've played other Paradox games, you're fairly familiar. But if you're watching this preview and are not necessarily familiar, there is some information in the wikis. There are some information in the dev diaries as well. But that's pretty much it for now. This is Asher. We're going to be talking a little bit more in the next preview as kind of a grab bag of different things that I've gleaned, picked up on in the various previews and streams as well. So we'll touch on those and kind of look forward to Stellaris, which is releasing actually next week. We are almost there. But thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to subscribe if you want to see more Stellaris content. And I look forward to doing this again in the future. Take care.